Thank you very much, Andrew. Yes, 6, or indeed, Nikki has just whispered in my ear, it's actually 7. It's the 7th iPOS User Day in the UK, and it's the first one that I've been invited to, so I thank you very much. I'm not sure what was wrong with the other 6 or what was wrong with me for 6 years. I'm reveling in this. It's just fantastic to have so many great organisations in the room and an opportunity to enjoy the day. I've met some of you over the years. I think there's some people who've been working with PA in some way or other for a decade, and others who are only starting that relationship. So I look forward to meeting more of you during the coffee and lunch breaks. That's interesting. There's something here that's not there. You will guess from my accent that I'm not from Australia. I'm originally from Dublin, and in 1986, with a rucksack on my back, I got on a plane and went to Australia to find my way in the world. And I loved it there. And I stayed, much to the disgust of my parents. And in 1997, I met Steve Howcroft. And he convinced me to join PA. And I joined PA as the first product manager for the Sun Systems enhancement products that they were developing at that time. In 98, Steve and I got on the plane and came to Heathrow for the first time to find out whether the work that we were doing in Australia had some broader purpose in the home Sun Systems market. So we came to the heart of Sun Systems. And we spent a happy couple of weeks meeting Touchstone, Keith Birch, Sapphire, Ian Caswell and Co., Foundation, Len Palmer, for people who remember that organisation. Indeed, John Dugdale from Lake, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. And we also went to Dogmersfield. Anyone remember Dogmersfield? A couple of hands going out. The great country house. So we went out and had lunch with Messrs. Pemberton and Patterson. And it was obvious that there was some opportunity for us to work with all those organisations here. And so from those long ago humble beginnings, I'm very chuffed and pleased to be here today and meeting you all. Now, the session I have today is not about us, and it's not about iPOS. It's actually about you. It's about people like you. And I hope you enjoy it. It started in early 2013. We sent out an anonymous web survey to every email address that we could gather of organizations who used iPOS. And we'd never done anything like this before. We didn't really know what we were doing. And we got some very interesting information. And as a result, we created an infographic, which is the first infographic we'd ever done. I don't know if anyone has ever seen that, but it was a response, an analysis to all of the responses of the survey. It created quite a bit of intrigue, and we decided to delve into it a bit more. And I headed off on a larger research project. I went looking for volunteers. I wouldn't say any of them were eager, but there were certainly willing volunteers, and there's some friendly faces in the audience today. We wanted to delve into a bit more detail around the drivers for tackling procurement. Savings, were there lessons learnt? What are people going to do in the next 12 to 18 months? And these organisations, some of them had been implemented only in the last year. Some of them maybe have been using iPOS for 5, 6, 7 years. They were face-to-face interviews that I thought I was building a stack of mini case studies, if you like. But after I'd done a couple, it became obvious to me that people were much more frank and honest if it was anonymous. So I changed the plan a bit and made it anonymous and went back to the start and went through again. And of course, actually, quite a lot of extra information came out on the basis that people's names weren't going to be attached to it. And of course, using people's names and company names involved marketing approval and all sorts of stuff. So it is an anonymous survey. Nobody is identified. You won't know. Even some organisations who responded probably won't even identify themselves in there. And I believe it's in your handout. Yes, there's lots of people flicking through it. So the session today is just to go through some of the highlights of the research. The big discovery was that pretty much everybody was on a journey. They were on a spectrum of moving from purchasing to procurement. And I suppose if you say, well, what's the difference between purchasing and procurement? Is that just semantics? And I actually hit Google and I said, what's the difference between? And of course, there are as many definitions as there are people in the room. My definition is that purchasing meant that people were focusing on the transaction, whereas procurement, people were focusing on improving the supply chain, getting the best they could out of their processes and supply chain. People who'd started in purchasing were moving into having solved the transactional and functional issues, getting closer to strategic decision making. The first question was top drivers. What are the top drivers to tackle procurement? And really there were no surprises. Financial management, compliance, and budget. Are we spending the right money? Does it stand up to audit? Are we in line with budget? No surprises there, and nothing really worth delving into. I then got into savings. Could you share typical savings with us? Pretty much everybody said we have no numbers. We've no numbers because it's a very hard thing to do, to build a financial return on investment, to really delve into what is it costing our existing processes and what will we save. It's like, actually, you need a lot of resources to do it. And that shouldn't be a surprise, actually, because it wasn't anybody's motivation. Nobody had set out to save money. They were setting out to improve their financial management and their budget management and their compliance. However, when you get into the stories, there were very vivid stories about people saving money. There was an infrastructure company that said, we were spending money paying worker teams in hard hats and high-vis vests to just sit there on site because we hadn't got our purchase order out. It was taking us a day to get the purchase order into the right hands so these guys would pick up their tools and do the work. So reducing the cycle from days to minutes instantly gave them massive return on investment. So everybody talked about eliminating paper purchasing, removing the delay, removing the lag, removing the double handling. A couple of organizations removed that whole manual approval signature book, the three signatures and getting the piece of paper and comparing it to, and I'm not sure that is, send it back, all of that sort of stuff. Huge amount of time saving. A financial services company saved hours per week. They had product managers spending hours every Wednesday building their P&L reporting because of their commitment spend. They were managing it all manually. And of course, the introduction of iPOS and commitment accounting, the reports came out like that. Vast amount of time. One organization said they reckoned they were spending £11,000 to £12,000 on printing and stuffing and posting. And so there, straight away, an annual saving. Every now and then there was an interesting outlier response. And there were 3 people who said they implemented iPOS to tackle their supplier invoice problems. They started at the end of the process, if you like, and said, well, we're not actually going to manage our spend. We're going to manage handling our invoices. And what was interesting is they all said they were now finding it very difficult to go back up the business and tackle the managing the spend problem. Building the business case and getting that done was proving difficult. So that's a bit of a lesson. I know there are some organizations in the room who are prospective iPOS users, maybe something to avoid there. Key measures of success. Lots of people in the report there. There's all sorts of KPIs that people used around tracking their activities. But the number one measure that everybody seemed to relate to was the concept of having a purchase order on the invoice. If you get a supplier invoice in and it's got your purchase order on it, well, you should be getting it. You know who it's for. You know how to match it. It just solves so many problems. And the best in class, if you like, the best in class or leaders, they're saying they're typically achieving 85% or more supplier invoices with a purchase order reference. And that's a pretty good metric. That's a great metric. A better full cycle KPI is the first time invoice match. Now, that's not easy to get out of iPOS, to be frank. And that's our problem, and we've solved that. But this is a very important metric because it effectively shows you your touchless invoices. If your first time you get an invoice and it matches to the purchase order and everything's right and it literally is load and submit for approval, that's as good as it gets. It is a measure that your processes and procedures are squeaky clean all the way through. It's a measure of data quality all the way through. So it is it's a very important metric. We've developed some new reporting that James Chisholm from Infor is going to touch on. And this is one of the metrics that falls out the bottom of that instantly. So looking forward to that. Challenges to change. This was, there was a lot of conversation around the challenges to change. And we have a fantastic case study from Neil Franklin from Micro Focus later on this very topic. The killer one was changing people's behavior. That's hard to do. Also, people found cultural change hard to do, changing the culture of the business, changing the fact that it was no longer finance's job to clean up everybody's mess. It was actually your job to take responsibility and accountability for it. And I see some grins around the room. I think that's probably hit a nerve. So I've just got a couple of slides on that. This is what I think change looks like. You know, you've got the before and the after and a chasm of chaos in between. And the goal of change management is to shorten or narrow that chasm and to try and make it smooth rather than jagged. Now, of course, that's the ideal, and Neil's case study really talks to how to tackle this problem. Something missing on that slide. In Australia, we had a specific client. It's okay for me to mention them. It was Sydney Opera House. So, you know, fantastic landmark building. Because of the nature of their business and operations, they had a very high turnover of staff. They peak and trough with contractors as shows are running. And if it's quiet, they don't have many people. And if they have a show in every theatre, then they've got loads of people. And what was happening, of course, is as somebody was leaving and somebody else was joining in, they were training. And as you know, internal training, you drop 30% at least. So this person teaches 70% of and then the next person comes in and it's 70% of that. And suddenly you're training people on really a pointless exercise. They implemented Infor EPAC, and they built a whole set of how do I do things in iPOS training material, great little videos. It was a very successful solution to that changing people's behavior, particularly if you're tackled or challenged with that turnover of staff. Probably worth considering. Nothing to do with us. You'd talk to your local Sun Systems partner, reseller, about Infor EPAC. There's a picture of it. Changing culture is a completely different beast. And I'm not going to go into it, but I thought I'd share this. This is a fantastic little video. It's 4 minutes. If you go to YouTube and search for how wolves change rivers. And it's a lovely documentary about the unexpected changes across the complete ecosystem as a result of introducing wolves into the Yellowstone National Park. So they hadn't been in the park for many, many years, 70 years, I think, and then they reintroduced something like 70 wolves in, and they just thought that's it. You know, there's a new thing at the top of the food chain, wolves and bears, no worries. But over 20 years, they discovered that the change in the ecosystem, by changing something so high up in the food chain, the rivers actually changed as a result of what. So there were massive, fundamental, unexpected changes as a result of something unenvisaged. So if you've got 4 minutes, even if you're not interested in cultural change, it's a fascinating little video. Managing large suppliers was another issue for a couple of organizations. Lots of people don't build the full supplier item catalogue. It's hard work, and plenty of people really just use the GL item level. But that's not acceptable for everybody. Some people have to use those large supplier catalogues, and it's hard work. Punch-out is the answer to that. There's a breakout session with Adrian later. Punch-out is the ability to, from within iPOS, go out to the supplier's own catalogue in the web, pick the things that you want, bring it back into iPOS, sort out the coding, send it through approval, send an electronic purchase order, receive an electronic invoice. So not only do you not have to manage the supplier catalogue, but you actually go straight to that first-time match KPI because it's all electronic. It's perfect data. There's no surprises, and it all marries up. So it's a very neat way of handling that problem. Goals for the next 12 to 18 months. Some people have only been using iPOS for a year, others for 5, 6, 7 years. And this is where we started to see that sort of breakout of purchasing versus procurement, improving the tactical or tackling the strategic. The drivers for those goals, they were battling it out at the top. 95%, 92%, 92%, really there's no difference. But data quality won out in the end, and I think data quality is the foundation of financial reporting. Quality data means you're getting the right information into the hands of the people who need it to make better decisions. So constantly striving for data quality in the business. If you've got goals, you need actions, because if you don't have actions in plan, you're not going to achieve those goals. Those goals are just going to expire in front of you. And again, we see that sort of purchasing versus procurement. The people who'd been running iPOS for some time were dealing in the strategic layer down the bottom, reviewing supplier quality and performance, structured supplier negotiations. The people who, in the tactical space, functional space, rationalizing their suppliers, bringing in preferred supplier systems, things like that. For the best in class, I asked them, what is your target for rationalizing your suppliers? Well, you've gone through it, it's hard work, what did you want to achieve? And basically 35%. And that meant if you have 1,000 suppliers, you need to cull 650 of those over time to get down to if you like, a best-in-class supplier register. And that's hard work. That's not easily done. You can't make rash decisions. You need to deal with duplication. You need to deal with the fact that it looks like you've never used that supplier in the last 12 months, but actually you use them for your Christmas hampers, and therefore you only use them once a year, so you can't get rid of them. But some of the organizations I talked to had 5,000 or 6,000 suppliers, and rationalizing that's hard work. So there's a second step to that. Having rationalized it, make sure it doesn't re-proliferate. Put in controls and methods to make sure that people don't keep introducing new suppliers in. Don't introduce duplication after you've ironed it out. There was an interesting point here. One organization, actually again it was the infrastructure organization, they discovered that they had a massive supplier register full of duplication because their suppliers had decided that they weren't good to work with because their processes were so bad, their purchase order processes were so bad. More is the point, their payment processes were so bad because they weren't managing purchase orders that they were always paying late. And their suppliers had actually sort of stepped away after a couple of bad experiences and were not taking on repeat business, and so they had to source another supplier, bring it in, go through the whole process, and then 6 months later do it all again. So there was a lot of work to do there, and they were already mending some of those bridges with their suppliers. A surprising revelation, not removing paper. This is one of my hobby horses. I have 5 minutes and I'll get a move on. I'm nearly at the end. stop managing other people's paper. Supplier invoices from your suppliers in envelopes. You need to talk to them about removing it. It doesn't make sense. People are considering putting in invoice scanning systems, and that's a 6-figure project to manage their supplier invoices. You need to look at how do you remove the paper from the process. And governments are removing it. If you look at the EU initiatives and indeed Australia, they are moving towards electronic invoicing because government knows how expensive it is to manage paper invoices. So we've talked about punch-out. XML. Can your suppliers actually deliver electronic invoices? Can they at least email it in a PDF? Stop opening envelopes and processing other people's paper. So extended productivity, 50% we're intending to implement punch-out, and that's a good sign. That message of don't manage other people's paper, that resonates. And also managing the supplier catalogs. Integration to other systems. Lots of people have an asset system, a housing management system, a logistics system, and they play a part in the purchasing cycle. Perhaps a pre-approved or an unapproved requisition, perhaps something from goods receipts needs to go back out, perhaps something from invoicing needs to go back out. So iPOS is fully extensible, and it's possible to integrate other systems in and out at every breakpoint in the transaction cycle. Lots of people intending to do that. And then a bit of a no-brainer, I'm sure if I asked this question again, it would be at the top, iPOS mobile approvals. You know, the internet is the size of your palm now. Executives want to do everything on a mobile or a tablet, and implementing iPOS approvals high on the list for people. So in summary, if you're smoothing out the supply chain, eliminating paper, driving for cost savings, struggling with change, every single person in this room is probably on that journey somewhere. You're amongst friends, reach out to people at the break, have a chat, and share. And if you talk to people who've been using the system for 5 years, ask them, well, how did you go about rationalizing your suppliers? You know, what are the important KPIs for you? These are good things to learn at a day like today. So that's it. Any questions? Deathly silence. Fantastic. You've got the answers to all the questions in the research paper anyway. It's not a read, it's a browse. I'm not expecting you to read it from front page to back.
We'll be doing questions and answers on it later. Big test.
Okay, big test at the end. So it's my pleasure next to introduce James Chisholm and Rory Forbes, who are the product directors for Sun Systems in Q&A. And they're going to run a session on strategic procurement and the closely aligned relationship between PA and Infor in this particular area.